Hello, and welcome to week 5 in the psychology of personality. And kind of on the tail end of moving away from Freud and the feminist movement within Freudian thought, we now look, again, still highly influenced by Freud, but beginning to establish a definitive psychology of women. So, chapter 7, the psychology of women. And we're introduced to a major theory, relational cultural theory. And what this is really pointing at is that from the feminist perspective, the people that were emerging from the world, you know, neo-Freudian world, the researchers that were there were recognizing that within many cultures, the focus of development, the energy that people put into, that women put into their development, really had to do with relationships with other people, that was kind of the key factor. And so they begin to move away from this idea that women are inferior and rather they're different. Now, understanding too that even to this day, we look at stereotypical traditional male female characteristics, and we still on occasion hold the male characteristics in higher esteem and the female characteristics in less. Now, that's changing. This is a dynamic thing that's happening. This is a pretty old start to a very dynamic psychology that's going on today. So this psychology focused on social relationships, the social role expectations of women in families and society, and whatnot. And the movement was either toward connection or disconnection, connection being the positive one that then led to what she talked about, mutuality and empathy, which this theory emphasizes is crucial to adult development. We have to be able to develop mutuality and empathy, and through that, we need to be connected to other people. Now, this viewpoint, as I was reading, as I was actually preparing for this mini lecture, the difference between men and women, talking the very distinct, making the extremes of those categories. Early in my psychological career, I was introduced to a process of human development that focused on moral development, or the cognitive ways in which individuals come to decisions as to what is right or wrong. Now, the major theory out there is Lawrence Kohlberg's justice perspective. Now, his work arose from his experiences working with male juveniles in the juvenile correction system, and he developed a stage theory very akin to Piaget's theory of more of cognitive development. They just line up, as our understanding of the world changed over time, the ways in which we determined what was right or wrong developed in the same stepwise fashion. Now, this justice perspective really focused on exactly that. It was stages that led ultimately to how we decide for the greater society, the justice, what is right or wrong, absoluteness, and whatnot when we're making moral decisions. Now, similar to Freud, even though this was much later, Kohlberg, when he developed the test for this and used it on women, found them to be morally inferior. So, of course, you can imagine that the women in the world of psychology were like, hold on here, something is amiss. You might be identifying one of those characteristics that actually demonstrates differences rather than greater and less than in the world of psychology when we're comparing men and women. Now, along came a researcher by the name of Carol Gilligan. And while we had Kohlberg's theory of justice perspective, we had Carol Gilligan came in and developed the three-stage theory and the care perspective that really focused on the moral developmental type processes that women go through are more focused on social relationships, justice, social relationships. Now, we get to sit back, all of these dichotomies within psychology, nature versus nurture, is it genetic or is it, do we learn about it? All these dichotomies, we can now take the perspective that both play into the notion of how we make decisions. And but that model, that care perspective versus the justice perspective, kind of hit my brain when I was preparing for this, when we were looking at this theory of women's personality being focused on social relations. So we see this kind of enduring perspective from the research and data pointing in that direction. Now, this also relates to the theory of looking glass self. We build, when we think about looking glass self, and I use that concept of having a committee of individuals that are placed on our looking glass self, and they provide us with feedback. Now, of course, we have to develop social relationships with them in order to understand the expectations of any member of our committee. We have to get to know what those expectations are. And the best we can do that, the skill that we have to be able to find out, very similar to when you have a professor for the first time, what are they looking for? So you get to know the professor a little bit. And if you're savvy in developing that soon, you could soon understand the kind of things that that person is looking for. Same with a boss, same with friends, family, all of these things. So this theory kind of, again, it kind of emphasizes that piece that I'm putting in this class all over, this cultural, social group, social belonging, connectiveness aspect of the development of our personality. And here it's kind of emerging out of a response to a very dichotomous perspective of greater than and less than that Freud brought to the table in terms of the differences between men and women. So, Chapter 7, Discussion A, the first discussion, what I want you to focus on is, here is this movement that, and if you ever take the history of psychology, you'll know that there were periods of time within the history of psychology where we were kind of examining, what was psychology shared across everybody, and then there was the era of individual differences. So what makes us the same, and then what makes us unique? And here we have this sex-related topic here, which in our current dialogue going on, we've expanded that into a very rich discussion about sex and gender, bringing in that sociological component of the expectations of females in society, the gender component, and the kind of constructive way in which we manage those things in our lives now. Freud felt that sexual development, procreation, was ultimately the driving force. Again, remember, this is all under the theory of evolution and the survival of your genes and all that was a primary biological drive. But yet today we see, but then we see this movement to, we should take social interactions into consideration too. But then now we're having a kind of a re-emerging of the centrality of the characteristic of sexual preference. So see if I can this is a lot to unpack here. Sexuality, it has become very important, while at the same time it's becoming very unimportant. And what I mean by that is, in advertising and in the conversation between, among individuals with sexual preferences and whatnot, sexual preferences can be a very centering and connecting aspect of a person's identity. Yet here we have this early research that's saying it's not all about sex. How does that kind of fit with today? How does this early effort to put sex in its place, how is that being received today? As maybe I'm mistaken, seems to me it's come front and center again. Are we transitioning to some, is society transitioning to a new place? Let's have a dialogue about that. Now, a lot of these things, these are raw ideas, and people have strong emotions associated with them. So let's make sure we keep our dialogues very professional, allow individuals to be heard. I'm expecting different opinions. That's the whole idea of having discussions in an online class. In the second discussion, I'm asking you to think about your looking glass self. Summarize it that way. Think about important people that you have developed relationships throughout your life who have been fundamental and instrumental in developing your personality. Sharing with that. Then in the quiz, I'm actually asking you to kind of do what you did in the first discussion and talk about an angle of that being boys and girls being raised in society right now. What impact does their gender and sexuality have on their development? So I'm picking these reflective topics to bring this, kind of older theory into a new context. So we're looking at this very sex identified theory being challenged by one that was more having to do with more than social connection and whatnot. And then how does that affect our lives today? Because I really think that there's wisdom in these theories over time, over the history of psychology. There's sometimes you get nuggets of really cool ideas from these theories. Let's see what you think about it. So we have those two discussions and the quiz for this week. And that's it. We're not doing two chapters this week. So, okay, that's what that's what this week is for. Have a great week, and I'll see you online. Take care.